This question is Pat, and Pat's on. Okay. Pat's here. Okay. Everybody's ready. I think we'll go ahead and start. Does anybody see anybody in the waiting room?
I just let them in.
You just let them in? Okay, thank you. So everybody in, Tim?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Ready.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we'll go ahead and start today. This is a Extension Forage and Livestock Hour, and I want to thank you all for being on this here at noon. My name is Patrick Davis, SMU Extension and Livestock Field Specialist down in Stockton, Missouri. And like I said, I want to thank you all for being on. I'm going to have a nice talk today about some topics here. Before we get into that, this program is being broadcasted through YouTube as well as Zoom, and I'll talk about later because it's being broadcasted through YouTube or via Zoom. It's being recorded, and so if you have interest in seeing it again, you can go to the YouTube IPM webpage, and it'll be archived there, and you can go there and find it again, as well as other programs. I'll kind of touch on that a little bit later. And so one of the things with this, as we get into the presentations, we're going to be talking about weather report, as well as fall fertility and fertilization and those kind of things. And so as you have questions throughout the day, the best way, or throughout the program, the best way to ask those questions is to go to the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Or in my case, it's actually at the top of the screen, but there's a chat button there. And if you want to give those questions anonymously, you can. I haven't changed it, but I'll take those questions, and you can do that. Put those in the drop. Send those questions, ask questions here, and you can do that anonymously. Or if you want to send the question to the entire group, you can type the question into the entire group. So either way is fine. It's just kind of up to you how you'd like to do it, but we do encourage questions, and thank you for those. And so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, we will try to answer those as best we can. And so as we get through here's kind of our agenda, where we're going today with the presentation, as customary with our Forage and Livestock Hours. Dr. Pat Guinan is going to give us a weather report. And then Tim Schnakenberg, who is an agronomy field specialist, SMU Extension down in Stone County, is going to talk about fall forage fertility management. And that'll be the main talk today. And so with that, Dr. Guinan, who's Associate Extension Professor of Climatology and Atmospheric Sciences within the Extension, and is going to give us a weather report. So Dr. Guinan, are you ready to go?
I am. Thank you, Patrick.
Yep, thank you.
And good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's a week where we've seen some improving conditions, but also degradation in regard to the drought intensifying, especially across southern Missouri. On the left is from last week. It's the drought monitor map showing the drought and the categories of drought. Highest intensity was here in these red area around Howell and Oregon counties, but you can see on the right, the new map that just came out this morning shows intensification of this drought, with extreme now covering pretty much all of Southwest Missouri, and it's been expanded to include some more of those far south central counties. Just to give the numbers or statistics, we've seen an increase in D3 from last week, just a little over 2%, to about a 16% jump to 18% of the state now experiencing D3 conditions. Not a good situation. We're obviously seeing a lot of impacts across the southern half of the state, most notably southwest and south central sections, where that has been the driest over for much of this summer. We've seen it all here in Missouri over the past week. We've gone from some catastrophic flooding a few days ago in east central Missouri, right around the St. Louis metro area, with that drought continuing to intensify across southwestern, south central sections. This is a radar estimate over the past 7 days, ending at 7 a.m. this morning. You can see who's been getting the rain and who's been missing out. Obviously, southwest Missouri, nothing to report across many of those counties. Some systems moved through and brought some welcome relief across mid-Missouri. A little bit too much rain across the east central sections, of course, in this corridor of red and magenta colors. That's anywhere from 5 to over 10 inches of rain. I know this is a weekly total, but most of this fell in this area within about a 24-hour period. Just amazing, some of the numbers that came out of St. Louis a couple days ago. But these are the numbers from actual rain gauges. You can see the table below. St. Charles, St. Louis counties, of course, where that intense rain event occurred, over 14 inches just outside of St. Peter's. You know, that's what you would expect generally for an entire summer, let alone a 24-hour period. So obviously you get that much rain in that short amount of time, we're going to see a lot of historic and catastrophic flooding, and that was the case, unfortunately, in portions of east central Missouri. The lighter amounts, even though 2 inches or more, I think that was much more welcome relief. It came at a good pace and really helped to mitigate the drought conditions somewhat. We still have a ways to go to make up that deficit. On the right, these are reports from COCORA's observers just over the past 24 hours. I want to focus here. Look at these totals that occurred in some of the worst hit areas for drought when this all began around the end of May. Some big totals here in Ripley County, over 3 inches in 3 locations. They had some storms that fired up late yesterday across right in this area and brought some welcome relief. You know, I'm sure those ponds might have reacted a little bit to it, even though the soils are so dry. I'm sure it soaked up quite a bit of that rainfall. Nonetheless, it's a step in the right direction, receiving these big totals. Some of these 3-inch totals were some of the highest totals they've seen in years for a one-day event. So badly needed rainfall, and it does look like more is on the way over the next few days. It's always interesting to note when we have a drought here in the summertime, it's usually accompanied with some extreme heat, and that has been the case. These are the departure from normal temperatures for July 1 through the 27th. Obviously, the driest areas, we're seeing the hottest areas. Who would have thought? There hasn't been any triple-digit heat in northern Missouri because the vegetation's green. They've been getting those frequent rains. Things look great in northern Missouri. And, you know, drought begets heat. When you start to dry out that soil, vegetation becomes stressed. There's not a lot of moisture that's available, and that sun's energy goes into heating up the atmosphere. You basically have a desert-like environment. It bakes the atmosphere, and so those maximum temperatures kind of go out of control. Look at this summary here from West Plains, right here in Howell County. Daily summary of temperatures. They had 11 degrees so far, 11 days so far of triple-digit heat. That's how hot it's been in these driest areas of southern Missouri. Again, extreme heat and drought during the summer, they usually go hand in hand. We've got some nice weather temperature-wise. It's a respite right here during the dog days of summer as we go into the month of August. So enjoy these nice temperatures. I know people and pets and livestock are going to like these numbers over the next few days. When we see highs today only in the middle 80s, of course, we have a boundary right through the middle of the state that's going to hang out for the next few days and perhaps sink more into southern Missouri. So the best chances of rain as we go into the weekend will be across southern parts of Missouri. Look at these numbers though. High temperatures on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and on into Monday, generally in the low to mid 80s, maybe even some upper 70s on Saturday. That's the best chance of rain, I believe, across southern Missouri. getting more seasonable as we start next week. So enjoy it while it lasts, because the heat is anticipated to return by next week. The min temperatures also look very pleasant over the next few days, generally in the 60s statewide. So some very nice weather. Here in the lower left, we do have a system. This is a radar image from about 15 minutes ago showing mid-Missouri. We have some showers and thunderstorms here in west central Missouri. They're generally moving east. So it does look like some more rain across central sections of the state. More is expected to develop as we go through the day across southern parts of Missouri. This is the forecast over Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It does look like a day-to-day chances of showers and thunderstorms. Best chances will be across the southern half of the state, highest likelihood across southern Missouri. This is the forecast over the next 5 days of precipitation. Look at the tight gradient. Generally not little to no precip across northern Missouri. And look at, as you go from central Missouri into southern sections of the state, that heaviest core of precip, anywhere it looks like from about 3 to 5 inches potentially is anticipated over the next 5 days. So this will be an excellent opportunity to start, recharging that soil profile, perhaps getting those ponds to start going up a little bit. And it's some badly needed rainfall we're going to need. Hopefully this will verify over the next few days with this pretty good chance, it looks like, at least according to the forecast, of some significant rainfall generally across the southern third of the state, anywhere from 2 to 5 inches here. I see just west here of Poplar Bluff. This is the forecast for next week. I alluded to those higher temperatures returning with a vengeance next week, and that is the case as we go into the month of August. A very high likelihood of above normal temperatures throughout much week. So again, those temperatures are going to be well into the 90s as we go into Tuesday through Saturday of next week. And unfortunately, it looks like, perhaps a return to more of a dry spell. And this actually is the forecast over the next couple weeks. This is just a 6 to 10 day outlook. But if you look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, we're calling for more of the same. So that ridge of high pressure is forecast to park itself again over the middle part of the country, bringing the heat and low chances of precipitation. This has been very helpful. The condition monitoring observer reports. If you have an opportunity, please use this web link here to submit your impact report on what you're experiencing in regard to the drought and the types of impacts we're seeing. We've had over 100 additional reports since we last visited last week, 227 reports total since July 1st. This is very helpful when it comes to assessing drought and categories of drought. And I appreciate it, the folks who have been submitting the information. Just a couple days ago, Tim submitted these pictures of highly impactful and sobering pictures when you look at them of the burned up pastures, cornfields that have been chopped up for silage, baled corn and soybean stress. And then Jill Scheit sent this picture on from the Barton County, Vernon County line showing pretty much the corn a total loss with it being all burned up. So use the QR code, share this information, and please continue to submit these reports. Patrick, that's a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but there is a lot of various resources in the chat that was put in there related to the weather. And so if you want to view those online, you can. But there's a lot of different resources there in the chat. And so with that, thank you again, Pat, and we'll move on to Tim Schnakenberg, agronomy field specialist in Stone County with MU Extension, and he's going to talk about fall forage fertility management. So Tim, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very, very, very much, Patrick. My internet seems to be a little bit unstable where I'm at right now, but I'm going to give it the best, and hopefully you can hear most of what I have to say. But I was charged with talking about fall forage fertility management. And so that's what we're going to kind of cover here. I appreciate the opportunity. This is the time of the year. Yes, it's still July, but it is the time of the year to start thinking about fall forage fertility management. These are some of the things that are kind of come up in discussion, at least in this part of the state here in Southwest Missouri. It may not apply 100% to Northern Missouri right now, but many parts of the state are dealing with drought and higher priced inputs. That's pretty well universal there. But I thought I'd address these 5 different things as we go throughout the discussion today. Stockpiling fescue with nitrogen. The nitrogen for cool season annuals, because there's a lot of discussion about trying to get all the forage lime, phosphate, and potash applications and timing on that. Manure distribution as a fertilizing practice, and not necessarily talking about manure just with a manure spreader, but also with the cow and how we feed hay. And then I want to just touch on, evaluating your legumes a little bit this fall. So number one, first thing that comes to mind really when we're talking about fall fertilization is stockpiling our tall fescue fields with nitrogen. Clearly, the recipe that we follow is not going to be hard this year. I have to admit that there have been other years where we have had some issues with that, where we had a lot of growth in August. But that's not necessarily growth in August those years. I think that it could still pay to go through this process. But applying 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer per acre in mid-August is kind of a good approach to go. I will say that we have changed our recommendations a little bit in recent years, in that with Kentucky 31 fescue, 40 pounds is probably a more realistic number, because we do know that the higher the endophyte problem will be, exasperated. I probably would never go above 60 pounds with a Kentucky 31 stand, but 40, maybe 50 pounds is probably a safer bet. Now, we have data here, responses to our nitrogen fertilizer applications much higher than this. In fact, there are some that will say as high as 75 to 100 pounds of nitrogen that we can get some effect from. But for most cases, 40 to 60 pounds. And definitely if you have a novel endophyte fescue, you can go higher than this if you've got a novel endophyte fescue. And then it's important for us to close gates to get the full effect of this, if we can possibly do that. I think stockpile is an excellent feed source. We typically will get 1,500 to 3,000 pounds of forage with good fertility. Often every pound of nitrogen that we put on, we could potentially get 15 to 20, maybe 25 pounds of forage from that. So that's important to understand. With strip grazing, we can potentially have 70% utilization, which is top end utilization when we have strip grazing. So I've done some calculations, and if you allocate about an acre or two of good stockpiled fescue, and yes, you need moisture requirements of a 1,200 pound beef cow well into the winter months for at least 50 to 100 days. There is some University of Missouri data. I don't have that necessarily right here, but I do have this Georgia data I wanted to highlight, and the University of Missouri data is very similar to this. But this was a study done in Georgia several years ago, where you can see if they applied no nitrogen, the circle to the left, you gained in the fall about 700 pounds, the blue bar. About 700 pounds was gained. But then if you put about 50 pounds on in September, in this case, that was Georgia, that's about 2,000 pounds that was gained. And so you really, the difference is about 1,300 pounds of feed that ate up just by adding nitrogen fertilizer, and in this case, 50 pounds. Well, I calculated that, and that's about 3.8 cents for every pound of forage gain. 1,300 pounds gain divided by the cost of 50 pounds of nitrogen. And I checked the fertilizer dealer, my local fertilizer dealer, just yesterday, and nitrogen fertilizer, ammonium nitrate in this case, was about $1 a pound. And so that's $50. And you can divide that, actually, that should be 1,300 pounds, 50 divided by 1,300 pounds, and that works out to be 3.8 cents per pound. Now, the question came up prior to this meeting about a formula or a calculation that is out there to help figure out what's the cost of the nitrogen. Will it really pay? And this is the best we can come up with, is that if you multiply that 3.8 cents per pound times 2,000 pounds, that's $76 a ton. So you can compare what is it costing you to buy hay or to produce your own hay to this $76 per pound. And I think fine that if you're buying hay, this is still a bargain. This is still a bargain. So, you know, this is one example, but this is an example that I think will kind of help us calculate, is it economical to spend a little money on it? Here's another approach to looking at it. And we're still, again, we're trying to feed this 1,200 pound lactating cow. She's going to have a calf on her this fall, 36 pounds daily dry matter per day. At today's hay cost during a drought here in South Missouri, at least, $1 that could be
I think we've lost Tim.
for stock. Oh, all right. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can now.
What happened? Did it completely go away for a little bit?
Yeah, you were talking about the stockpiling.
Okay. Sorry about
that
that.
whole, it pretty much started on that whole slide there.
Okay. I'll go back to this. Sorry about that. I think we had an internet issue, but can everyone see okay now?
Yeah, it's good now.
Very good. So really, we're trying to feed a 1,200 dollar bale for a 900 or 1,000 pound bale, which may or may not be where we need to be. Depends on where you're at in the state, but I figured it costs about $3.10 per cow, and that's factoring in just a 10% feeding loss. A stockpiled fescue, putting on just 40 pounds of nitrogen, factoring in some pasture rent, 2,500 pounds of dry matter with a 70% utilization. So we're strip grazing. That's about $1.33 per cow per day. And these numbers have really substantially jumped since the last time I figured this. But it always kind of works out about the same. It's about at least 2 times, or if not more, to buy hay and feed cattle versus using stockpiled fescue. So that's just a good rule of thumb that we generally see. And again, get our stockpiled fescue off and running this year. It's also important to think about, if we're going to be adding nitrogen, to keep our nutrient loss to a minimum. So we have to kind of watch for timing of rain, specifically if we're using urea fertilizer. You know, we can add agrotane or anvil or some of these other materials that may be available to you and buy ourselves about 14 days substantial losses of the urea. We generally don't have a problem with ammonium nitrate. We don't have to worry about ammonium nitrate. So, you know, if you're using urea, definitely this time of year, we need to have some kind of a nitrogen stabilizer and at least get us about 14 days. Super U may give us a little more than the 14 days, but something to consider. I threw this data in. This is actually spring growth from Ryan Locke at the University in Missouri. And it's showing about 1,000-pound gorge. So it's pretty typical to what we're seeing in out of that Georgia data. But this was a study that, this was for 50 pounds of nitrogen versus 100 pounds of nitrogen. Again, this is spring growth, but I think that this fall growth data is very similar to this. But I did want to throw this in just to show the importance of using, compared to straight urea, using Anvil, which is very similar to Agritane, or Super U, or switching over to ammonium nitrate if you have that access, and many across the state do not. But it does make a difference to have these in there. Okay. We sometimes will even contend that sometimes we don't necessarily have to put nitrogen on in the spring, especially if we're not overstocked. If we're overstocked, we probably should, but we probably get a more profitable benefit from putting a later spring application of nitrogen on, and definitely the fall application. If it translates into feeding less hay, we're making money. We're actually going to be better situation for making money. Now, I want to switch now to talking about winter annuals, because I don't know, many of the agronomists have had lots of calls in the last week or two about planting winter annuals, because we're going to need as much feed as possible here in South Missouri. And the ones with asterisks beside them are the ones I think, really hold the best promise for getting some fall growth, whether we're going to make haylage out of them or we're going to graze them. Triticale, probably my personal don't do this, but there is an option for fall oats in the fall, particularly if we get on it early, preferably sometime by latter August. And then the brassicas, if we get on by latter part of August or mid-August, and the weather's working with us, we can get some brassicas like turnips, kale, radishes, that sort of thing going. And I also want to admit too that a lot of folks kind of interchangeably use the term rye and ryegrass, but there's definitely a difference. Ryegrass is on the left, rye is on the right, the cereal rye. And I would lean more to the cereal rye versus ryegrass. I feel like you would get a lot more fall growth with the cereal rye if that's what you're after, and more spring growth with the ryegrass. So bear that in mind. I run across that quite a lot. Using these annuals are sometimes necessary situations like these where we need some emergency. It's quite expensive now. We can potentially put them in thin fescue stands, although I would not put them in a good dense stand of fescue. We want to stockpile those, but really thin fescue stands, there's a possibility that would work. Definitely warm season fields like Bermuda grass, crabgrass, those fields. And then behind corn, forage, sorghum, or millet. And then also during the renovation of pastures. These are when I see them working the best. So, if you're going to be growing these cool season annuals, rye or triticale, planting those usually in early September is a good time. Typically, I know there's some that may jump the little bit this year, but and that's all going to be related if we have a change in our weather patterns. We'll typically, plant about 2 bushels worth, 100 to 130 pounds per acre. That's a solid stand rate, high. And then fall oats may be planted in August. But from a fertility standpoint, I generally recommend 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre at planting. And then you can come back, follow up with about 50 more in the spring if needed. Sometimes with rye, we may not need that much, but wheat probably could use that much. That will put more than that on, and I do believe it can respond accordingly if you do. So, 75 pounds, 80 pounds of nitrogen could potentially be put on. But this is probably a conservative amount of 40 to 60 pounds considering the situation we're in this year. And then moving on, there's other option of using the brassica. So this is a picture from Lawrence County, turnips and rye that was planted several years ago. And again, we've got to plant these early to get the growth we want. In this part of the state, I probably wouldn't plant them after, probably would not plant them after September 15th. Growth that we need. And really we find it's to grow a mix of brassicas and cereals from a animal nutrition perspective. But I would suggest that if you're going to grow the turnips do respond well to high doses of nitrogen. And they're about as quick a feed as you're going to find. Brassicas are more dependent on phosphorus, so check your soil test out and make sure if there's phosphorus needed for root growth to put that on. And there may be some benefit from sulfur. They tend to use more sulfur than many other forages that we use. Now, number 3, I think we need to consider lime application if a soil test calls for it. It's just such a foundational fertility input. We probably get more return on investment with lime, and the price of it is more stable than fertilizer right now. And fall gives us time to get that reaction to occur prior to spring growth. So really, this is a great time to be dealing with getting lime on. The dealers are going to be more available to apply lime, and highly recommend fall application. We get questions all the time about liquid calcium compared to limestone. And I have some data that came out of the University of Kentucky. They actually, Touche and Richie Grove and McGrath worked on this. They did a lab project and a field project on 16 farm fields throughout Kentucky with small plots. And in the lab, they started with soil that all measured 5.2 pH. They used liquid calcium, they used pelletized lime, they used ag lime. And you can see in 3 months the difference. The pelletized lime and the ag lime made a huge jump of 1 point just within 3 months of this lab. Liquid calcium was equal to the check, no difference. In the field, but in 3 months, they found no change in the liquid calcium. They found a 0.3 pH point change in the pelletized lime and 0.4 in the ag lime, which is kind of different than I would have expected. Figured the pelletized would work a little quicker, but long term, we might see that happen. So, we just from an agronomy perspective, we're not seeing the response that you would that some are saying they're getting. So I'm not really sold on this concept. And from a calcium benefit, it takes a lot more. I mean, calcium by itself does not adjust pH. A typical plow layer of ag soil already contains about 2,600 pounds of calcium per acre, and 5 gallons per acre of liquid calcium only 5.5 pounds. So what are we gaining? It's a drop in the ocean. So I just wanted to address that because there's been a lot of discussion about that, and we're not really seeing this happen. There's no substitute sometimes. Fall is also a great time to apply phosphate and potash. So getting your DAP on, getting your potash on, any blends that your soil test is calling for could be, a very good time to get that done. We want to monitor those nutrient levels. So if you don't have a soil test, at least in the last 3 or 4 years, time to do it again. It's more important now than ever. People will constantly ask us sometimes, how much fertilizer do I put on a field? And And I can tell you about nitrogen fairly easily, but I have no earthly idea. It's a guessing game. We can talk about putting putting back what's taken off in a hay crop and a corn crop, but we don't know where you started from. We don't know, in a pasture situation, how much is really needed to get you up to par. So it's really best to have a soil test in hand. And, I find that people who have the better tools to get it done are going to get it done. And so having tools that kind of help you get this done quickly really makes a big difference. And also, this is a good time if you want to consider a more followed by variable rate application is a great way to get that done as well. This might be a good time if you're really wanting to fine tune your nutrient management to have some of this done. It's important to keep these fields maintained if it's financially feasible. Depending on nitrogen alone in hard times may not always be a great solution, although we sometimes have to do that. But we don't want to get in a trap where we start doing this year after year after year, because we'll get way behind and we'll never get caught up. I think particularly hay fields is where we have this problem the worst. But pastures, they can maintain themselves if they're, if there's a rotational grazing system pretty well, but we need to know where to start. It is okay for some to coast if their fertility is good, and that's, if they depend more on grazing versus crop removal, if they've got good management over the prior years, maybe we can coast in times like this. But our management systems need to be built for the hard times, times when prices are high, times for when your hay prices are high. We need to be prepared for this, and keeping that soil in good shape is important. Use the manure or litter that may be available. Prices are higher, but they're not as dramatic as some of the fertilizer prices right now. Availability is an issue. So getting it to your farm may not be as easy as it was a few years ago. But I would contend that you need to take full advantage of manure off your own farm first. Your cheapest fertilizer source is the manure that's coming out the backside of that cow. And I call it a stinking awesome resource. I mean, it is not a byproduct that is to be ignored. It is something to manage on your property. You manage the cattle, but you also need to manage the manure that they're producing, because it is the cheapest fertilizer you're going to have. So keep the four-legged manure spreaders moving. You can increase your utilization by having a management-intensive grazing system and almost double your utilization in many cases. And so that equals better manure management. Keeping the cows from spending so much time under the trees when they could be, or in the water hole, when they could be out doing manure, being the manure spreader. And there's data out of North Missouri that really backs this up, that in a 24 pasture rotation versus a 3 pasture rotation, the distribution of fit to this practice. Dragging paddocks is a question that often comes up. And I would say that in most cases, it's not necessary. It is supposed to. There will be sacrifice paddocks. There may be some feeding areas that are heavy. There may be some merit there, but the goal is not to add another way to burn diesel. And so let the cows be the spreader of your manure piles as much as possible, and let the micronutrients or microorganisms break down those piles appropriately. Now, I've been tracking the nutrient value of a 900-pound fescue bale for some time now, and as far back as November of 2020, the nutrient value based on current prices with my fertilizer dealer in Southwest Missouri here, there's every bale had about $21 of nutrient value in it. It kind of peaked about May of 2022 at about $38, significantly higher, almost twice. And then I checked just yesterday, and nitrogen has come down, specifically ammonium nitrate did. Urea is still up there too, but ammonium nitrate did drop a little bit. And so that price has dropped to about $31. So if you're spending, $30 for a bale of hay, you're getting about $30 of nutrient value with it. If you're spending $70 for a bale of hay, you're still getting about $30 of nutrient with it. So this is a factor that we don't always consider to the farm or move it around the farm. So, some have actually considered buying hay to bring nutrients from someone else's farm. And so that does make a lot of sense. Instead of using it up your nutrients in one part of the property and taking it to another, you're bringing someone else's fertility to the farm. So we can enhance manure distribution, just how we feed our hay. We can even graze some of our hay fields when we don't typically do that, and carefully feed hay on it so we don't make a mess over the winter, and that brings manure on. But then also the way we feed our hay around the farm does make a difference in getting fertility spread. So instead of having to go to town and buy fertilizer, we're better utilizing the fertilizer that's being produced. The study that was done in Linnaeus replicated trial, a collar on one of the 13 cows in each of the replicated treatments. You can see where that cow spent most of her time, where there was a stationary ring versus moving the ring around versus unrolling hay. So it kind of tells the story about how manure can be distributed, how we feed our hay. These are two. The top section is one replication. The second is below, and there was a third one down below that. And you can kind of see the stationary rings. You can see where they move the rings versus where they unrolled the hay. And even from this high elevation, you can see how fertility has been moving around the field. This is another shot. This is a project at the University of Kentucky where they were doing spaced bale grazing. These were bales that were spaced 50 feet or less, and fed with a poly wire. And so it's clear that manure was being captured on this place. You can argue that they're tearing up the field, and they probably are to some degree, but some seeding probably has to be done to fix that. But this is one approach. It may not be as appealing as other ways of feeding hay, but this is a aerial shot from that little project that they were working on. Lastly, I think it's always important to grow our own nitrogen instead of having to buy it and to be solely dependent upon commercial fertilizer. Legumes can fix 50 to up to 300 pounds of nitrogen. We don't always get that because we consider that about 20% of that nitrogen is actually fixed and available to the surrounding grass. So the cow eats that grass or that legume, and the manure and the urine is distributed for the grass around it. And also nodules will break down, slough off, and release some of that over time as well. And it's a sustained amount of nitrogen, not necessarily, like you're putting and you see it immediately. It's sustained throughout the year. This part of the world, we're looking at white clover, red clover in north Missouri, we can consider birchfoot foil and red clover are probably the common way to do this. And there is a contention that we sometimes there are paddocks that have too much white clover. And so if that's the situation, you're probably set and probably don't need any more, but evaluate your field as you go and see where you're at. I would say that if you're concerned about having too much clover, you might consider using more red clover because you can control that a little bit more. You can control that clover just with red clover because it doesn't last quite as long. If you're looking at adding clover to a novel endophyte field, I would probably go with a red clover. And if you can use red clover, then you can come in and not have so much trouble keeping it in there. So last slide, the effect of legumes on grass stands. This is actually data out of Pennsylvania. And you can see in this data set from 2005 and 2006, the light blue line is where there was no nitrogen used on orchard grass in this case, whereas they were comparing using various types of legumes to as much as 225 pounds of nitrogen per acre, 252 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare would be equal to 225 pounds of nitrogen, quite a bit, much more than we would ever recommend. But you can see that the darker blue line shows the nitrogen application, and then the colored lines show the legume dry matter yield. And so really we're getting quite a bit of benefit in this study to the orchard grass with legumes versus just putting nitrogen on. So that's all I've got at this point. Would be willing to take questions if there are any.
Thanks, Tim. I don't see any questions related to this. Does anybody have any questions? Any follow-up questions to what Tim's talked about today?
So hopefully we answered the question about the formulas that you could use, just showed some quick calculations that could be used to try to figure out your nitrogen benefit may be and tying it to the current price of nitrogen.
Okay. Not seeing any other questions. Again, thank you, Tim. We'll just go ahead and wrap up. And of course, Tim's contact information is there if you have any questions in the future or anything. So as we wrap up, I just wanted to share. Again, I talked about this earlier, but the MU IPM YouTube page website, if you search that online and go there, you can scroll down a little bit. It talks about the Forage Livestock Hour. We used to call it Forage Livestock Town Hall, and it's got an archive there of the various presentations that we went through at previous times. And so if you want to scroll through those, if you have any interest in looking at any of those previous presentations, those are there for you to look at. As we move into August, we do have one scheduled meeting in August right now, and that's going to be on August 11th at noon. You can either register online and get the Zoom link, or you can watch it via YouTube Live. Just log on to the MU IPM YouTube page at noon when we start on August 11th. And the presenter that day will have a weather report, which is customary by Dr. Pat Guinan, but also Stacy Hamilton with the University of Missouri. He's a in the dairy, he was dairy extension. I think he's just an instructor now in the dairy area, is going to talk about winter feeding pastures. And so that'll be the topic that we will cover on August 11th. And so with that, want to thank you all for being on today. And of course, this presentation's recorded. So if you want to go back and see any parts of it, it's there at the IPM YouTube page. If you want to register for future meetings, if you go to ipm.missouri.edu and town halls, you can register. And if you ever have any questions or anything, you can register and provide those questions, and we'll try to answer them during the presentation that you register for. Or if it's
Patrick, there was a question that came up in the chat. I
Oh.
saw. There was a question in the chat I just saw. Brooke was asking, do you have any thoughts
Yeah, and Eric had been talking with
on
her,
decreasing
Eric
the amount
Bailey.
of hay fed and supplementing with 20% range cubes?
Yeah, and Eric Bailey had been talking to her about that, so we've got that
Okay.
question answered.
Very good.
Mhm. And so back to what I was talking about. If you ever have any questions or anything prior to the town halls, you can register at the ipm.missouri.edu town halls page and provide those questions, and we'll try to answer those either during the livestock and forage hour meetings or during the forage and livestock hour meetings, or we will try to do that through individual emails. And so with that, again, I'll thank you all for being on. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Pat, for your presentations today. And we will see you next time on August 11th.